I call the member for Forest.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I don't support the amendments, like my colleagues, to both of the bills before the House. And in simple terms, the legislation, as we know, will basically damage the integrity of the electoral roll by adding new electors who may not be entitled to vote without their knowledge. It's going to do so without their knowledge and potentially without their consent, and particularly if the elector does not receive the Australian Electoral Commission's notice of enrolment. And we do know, I live in a rural and regional electorate, and this certainly does happen. And that's evidenced by the numbers of inquiries I get at the time coming to an election. Now, we do believe on this side in personal responsibility, and we believe it's an individual's responsibility to enrol to vote, to notify as well the AEC if they change their address, and then to vote at elections. And it is really important that the extensive privacy implications that this legislation raises really what we've seen that has been virtually ignored by the Labor Party and the Greens. And we know that we've heard this mentioned previously today, with the Electoral Referendum Amendment Maintaining Address Bill, Dr Roger Clark of the Australian Privacy Foundation provided the committee that looked into this with some valuable information about individual privacy concerns that this bill raises. And we share those concerns. And we've got very real concerns about electors having those details published, as I said, on an electoral roll without their knowledge and without the opportunity to apply for silent elector status. Now, depending on where the AEC sources this information from, this is certainly a very real issue. But the integrity of the electoral roll, has been articulated by my colleagues, is at the very heart of our democratic process. It is at the very heart of our democratic process. And it is imperative as a result of that, that we maintain the actual integrity of that roll. I think it is paramount in any democracy, but particularly in this one in Australia. It needs to be accurate, as we've heard, and we do know that seats can and will be decided by a small number of votes. So the integrity of the roll and the will of the people that is expressed by that is paramount. So the responsibility for enrolling and updating individual elected details is so important, but it is an issue when that right and responsibility is taken from the individual and given to the AEC, as this bill will do. And not only is there the possibility for significant errors, it also opens the roll to fraud. And I have no doubt that that's what we will see. So the bill, as I said, will corrupt the integrity of the electoral roll. And the fact that you're going to be put on this roll without your knowledge is really, it could lead to quite a number of potential irregularities. And the bill gives the AEC the discretion to actually determine what those sources of reliable and current data are, where those addresses can be obtained from. And really this is far beyond the purview of the AEC, and really only an individual. It is up to me to tell the AEC about my details and about my environment. So it really comes down to an individual to say to the AEC about enrolling and maintaining the address that I would have, and to change the address. And I think the issue of reliability of data sources has been mentioned repeatedly by my colleagues, and I don't think we should underestimate this issue, where the information comes from. We heard previously from the member for Aston, and he touched on the reliability of the sources of information and the source of the potential roles. And we've heard about the fact that there were 3.2 million more tax file numbers than people, if that was the source of information and data. And an ANAO audit report of Medicare found that up to half a million. Now, we're not talking about enough votes or enough integrity. We're talking about the fact that this could have a major impact on any outcome of an election using perhaps potentially incorrect information and data from whatever source the AEC chooses to use. Now, the other thing I think as coalition members that we are majorly committed to and have great concerns about is that the right to vote, in our view, is one of the highest held tenets of democracy. The right of the average citizen to play their own individual part in deciding who will lead them into the future, who their government will be, is basically essential to democracy, to good governance in our world. And it is a privilege. I don't think any of us on this side see the right to vote as anything other than a right and a privilege in this country. And we don't take it for granted. And I am hoping that the majority of Australians don't take it for granted either. Because just talk to the people of Syria, perhaps. Talk to the people in Egypt. And people fight and die for the right to vote on a regular basis. And I was privileged to go to Cambodia as an Australian delegate to the United Nations to look at the election process in Cambodia. And one of the most profound experiences I had as part of that was the absolute excitement of the Cambodian people at having the right to vote. And the fact that in that system, one of the ways that they tested whether someone had only voted once was the use of indelible ink. And they would dip their finger into this ink as a sign that they had voted. But what they did then they came out of that, out of voting, out of wherever whether it was school, out of the polling booth, and they knew who I was. I had the vest on, and they knew what I was there for. They used to come up to me with great excitement, showing me their finger. They were just absolutely elated at the right to vote. And I think that that's something that we in Australia see, well, we can sometimes, because we've all grown up with it. It's what we expect, know and love, but we also need to protect. And that's what the integrity of the electoral roll does. It protects that right, the right to vote, the eligibility of the individual elector, and that is critical to what we do as a nation. And as I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, when I met those people in Cambodia, it made me look at the things I value about being fortunate enough to be raised in this fantastic country where democracy and a democratic process is something that we expect. But I see with this bill that that expectation may be compromised, and I'm not prepared to sit back and say, that's fine, because I don't believe that it is. And, you know, we've had constant battles for representations and referenda, and Mr Deputy Speaker, what I'm trying to get to is that in Australia we shouldn't take this right and this privilege for granted, and it has been hard won. And over many years around the world, countless lives have been lost in the pursuit of the right to have a say in who are your elected representatives and in the form of governance and government in your country. But in the same way that it's a right, it should, because of the respect for that right, carry an inherent responsibility. And it is the responsibility side that is also often forgotten, especially in our country that is so blessed by a stable democracy, probably for longer than almost any in living memory. And, you know, what is it that we ask of our fellow Australians who want to inherit and should inherit their share of Australian democracy? What is it that we're simply asking them to do? We simply ask them to register to vote and to come along on election day, to let the AEC know if you change your address. And I really don't think that that is too much to ask. And in fact, I think it underpins how important our democracy is, and it also underpins the need for us to actually fight for that right and to protect that right. And if we gave that opportunity to people who live in other countries who don't have the right to vote, I wonder if they would say, you know, maintaining my address is just too hard. I think that what they'd say, like those people in Cambodia, I am absolutely beside myself with the right to vote. And here I've got the finger that I dipped in the indelible ink to prove the fact that I had the right to vote, and I am so excited about having the right to vote. And in fact, for some of those people, they hadn't been able to vote many times in their lives. So that is what we are, why we need to protect the integrity of our electoral roll. And I am concerned that we're debating a bill that basically thumbs its nose at our proud history of democracy and our entitlement to vote, and is open to fraud and abuse. I am appalled that our electoral roll, as a result of this, could be subject to fraud and abuse. And I would think anybody who, like me, absolutely values this right to vote and our democracy and is prepared to stand up for that would feel the same, and should feel the same. And we don't take it for granted. Now, the government is suggesting that this effort of maintaining your address and maintaining the electoral roll or the right to vote or your register to vote is too much for an Australian, and that the government has to do it for them. Well, you know, I think we need to take responsibility, and we need to constantly reaffirm the fact that we value this democracy. We don't take our rights and our democracy for granted, and I don't believe that it's too much to ask for us to maintain our addresses. And, you know, I just don't think that we should be taking it that lightly. It's our freedom and our democracy here that are part of this bill and part of what is potentially eroded by these bills before the House. And we know that Australians before us have fought and died to build and protect the democracy that we now enjoy. And I would encourage all Australians, never take that for granted. Never. And never take for granted the integrity of the electoral roll and how important it is to our democratic process. But it appears that the government doesn't understand that sacrifice and thinks that perhaps getting to whether it's a post office to get an enrolment form or seeking it from an elected representative or from the AEC and putting it in a postage paid envelope is too hard for Australians. Well, strangely enough, millions of us have managed to do so. We've been able to quickly and simply have our democratic say. Now, I see the bill before the House as an insult to those who've made the effort to enrol, to those who fought and died for the democracy we've built, and to those over centuries who have fought for democracy. I would urge all Australians to see this and to see the right to vote, your eligibility to vote, as a reinforcement of our democratic process. And we all, as members, talk to young people in schools, and we go along and we present flags and we talk about the rule of law. We talk about what our flag represents, and I think our electoral roll and the integrity of it fits into the same category. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.